Brothers, you're gonna think I've lost my damn mind, but I swear on my mother's grave that every word I'm about to tell you is the God's honest truth. If you've ever driven through Kafazal Hills at night, you know there's something wrong with that place. Something that makes your skin crawl and your gut twist into knots. I thought I knew what fear was after 15 years on the road, hauling everything from livestock to hazmat materials across this godforsaken country. But that Tuesday night, descending those winding curves with a load of electronics bound for Sao Paulo, I learned that some roads don't just take you from point A to point B. Some roads take you straight to hell. It was 2:30 a.m. when I hit the steepest part of the descent, my diesel engine rumbling like a caged beast as I downshifted through the curves. The fog was thick as molasses, clinging to my windshield like it had a life of its own, and that fine drizzle that barely qualifies as rain was making everything slick and treacherous. My wipers were working overtime, but that mist just kept coming back, smearing across the glass in patterns that almost looked like fingerprints. The dashboard lights cast an eerie glow inside my cab, and I could feel the weight of my 38 in the glove compartment, a comfort I'd carried for years but never thought I'd actually need. Something about this night felt different, like the very air was holding its breath. What struck me first was the silence on the CB radio, and I mean dead silence, not even static. Normally, Kafazal Hills buzzes with chatter all night long, truckers shooting the breeze, warning each other about speed traps, or just talking to stay awake on those long, lonely stretches. But tonight, Channel 19 was quiet as a graveyard, like every other driver had simply vanished from the face of the earth. I tried switching channels, tapping the mic, even checked my antenna connection, but nothing. Just that oppressive, suffocating quiet that made my ears ring. The only sounds were my engine's steady growl, the rhythmic squeak of my wipers, and the whisper of rain against metal and glass. That's when the smell started creeping in, sweet and cloying like cheap perfume mixed with something that had gone bad in the summer heat. At first, I thought it might be my air freshener acting up, or maybe something rotting in my sleeper berth, but the odor kept getting stronger, seeping through my vents like poison gas. I cracked the window, hoping for fresh mountain air, but the smell just intensified, making my stomach churn and my eyes water. It was the kind of scent that gets into your clothes, your hair, your very pores, and refuses to let go. I've smelled death before, roadkill, accident scenes, cargo that went bad, but this was different, almost alive in its putrid sweetness. The road seemed to stretch on forever, each curve leading to another curve, each mile marker taking twice as long to reach as it should have. I'd driven this route hundreds of times, knew every pothole and guardrail by heart, but tonight the familiar felt foreign, like I was traveling through some twisted mirror version of reality. My headlights cut through the fog in weak yellow beams that seemed to die just yards ahead of my bumper, swallowed by that hungry darkness. The temperature in my cab kept dropping despite my heater running full blast, and I found myself gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles had turned white. Every instinct I'd developed over 15 years of night driving was screaming at me to turn around, to get off this mountain, to run. That's when I started feeling watched. Not the casual glance of another driver or the mechanical stare of a traffic camera, but something predatory and patient, like a wolf studying its prey. I kept checking my mirrors, convinced I could see headlights following me, but every time I looked there was nothing but that impenetrable wall of fog. The feeling crawled up my spine like ice water, raising the hair on the back of my neck and making my hands shake on the wheel. I tried to rationalize it. Fatigue, stress, maybe too much coffee at the last truck stop, but deep down I knew this wasn't exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. Something was out there in that mist, something that shouldn't exist, and it had its attention fixed squarely on me. The fog seemed to pulse with its own rhythm, thick one moment and thin the next, like the mountain itself was breathing. Through the shifting veils of mist, I caught glimpses of shapes that didn't belong, twisted trees that looked like gnarled hands reaching for my truck, shadow figures that moved just outside my peripheral vision, and lights that flickered in impossible places. My radio suddenly crackled to life for just a second, long enough for me to hear what sounded like a woman's voice calling for help. But when I grabbed the mic to respond, there was nothing but that suffocating silence again. The sound sent chills down my spine because I swear it wasn't coming through the speakers. It was coming from inside my own head. I pressed harder on the accelerator, desperate to get through this nightmare stretch of road, but my speedometer needle seemed stuck in slow motion. The engine was working fine, RPMs climbing like they should, but I felt like I was crawling through quicksand, making no real progress despite the illusion of movement. My fuel gauge hadn't moved in what felt like hours, even though I should have burned through at least a quarter tank by now. Time itself seemed broken on this mountain, stretched and warped like taffy in the hands of some cosmic child. Every second dragged like an hour, every mile felt like a marathon, and I was beginning to wonder if I'd ever see the bottom of this godforsaken hill. The sweet, rotting smell was so strong now that I had to breathe through my mouth, and even then it coated my tongue with its nauseating flavor. My eyes were watering, my head was pounding, and I felt like I might throw up all over my dashboard. The fog pressed against my windows like living flesh, and I swear I could see faces in its swirling patterns. Distorted, anguished faces that appeared for split seconds before dissolving back into the mist. My CB radio sat silent as a tombstone, but I could feel electricity in the air, like the moment before lightning strikes, making my skin tingle and my teeth ache. Something was building toward a crescendo, some terrible revelation that I wasn't ready to face. That's when my headlights cut through the fog and illuminated the impossible, a scene that would haunt me for the rest of my days and change everything I thought I knew about the world. What I saw in that brief, crystal-clear moment of visibility should not have existed, could not have existed, yet there it was, real as the steering wheel in my hands and twice as terrifying. My foot instinctively moved toward the brake pedal. My hand reached for that .38 in my glove compartment, and my mouth opened to shout a warning that no one would hear. Because sometimes, brothers, when you're driving alone through the darkest corners of this world, you discover that the road doesn't just take you where you want to go. Sometimes it takes you exactly where you were never meant to be. There she was, caught in the harsh glare of my headlights like a deer frozen in terror. But this was no animal. This was a young woman with long, dark hair being dragged across the wet asphalt by her arms. The man pulling her had his back to me, a tall figure in dark clothing whose face I couldn't see, but his movements were deliberate, methodical, like he'd done this before. She was fighting him, her legs kicking frantically against the pavement, her mouth open in what should have been screams, but produced no sound that reached my ears. When she looked directly into my headlights, her eyes reflected the light like polished mirrors, wide with terror and something else, a desperate plea that cut straight through my chest like a knife. Time seemed to stop in that moment, the fog swirling around them like smoke from some hellish fire, and I knew with absolute certainty that I was witnessing something that would change me forever. My foot slammed on the brake pedal with such force that my load shifted behind me, the screech of air brakes cutting through the night like a banshee's wail. The truck shuddered to a stop maybe 50 yards from where they were, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might burst right out of my chest. Without thinking, I threw the truck into park, killed the engine, and lunged for my glove compartment, where my .38 waited like an old friend. The metal was cold in my trembling hands as I chambered around, the familiar click of the cylinder rotating, bringing me a small measure of comfort in this nightmare. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking like a teenager's as I threw open my door and jumped down to the asphalt. "Hey, you son of a bitch, let her go!" The fog seemed to thicken around me the moment my boots hit the ground, wrapping around my legs like ghostly fingers, trying to pull me back into my cab. I could barely see my own truck behind me as I stumbled forward, the .38 raised and ready, my finger already finding the trigger. The sweet rotting smell was overwhelming now, so thick I could taste it coating my tongue like syrup, making me gag with every breath. "I've got a gun!" I yelled again, though my voice sounded muffled and distant, as if the fog was swallowing my words before they could travel more than a few feet. The woman's terrified face was burned into my retinas, those reflecting eyes boring into my soul, and I knew that whatever happened next, I couldn't live with myself if I didn't try to save her. I ran toward where I'd seen them, my work boots slapping against the wet pavement, the sound echoing strangely in the thick air. The fog parted before me like a curtain, then closed behind me like a trap, and with each step, the scene ahead should have become clearer, but instead it seemed to fade like a photograph left too long in the sun. My lungs burned from breathing that poisonous air. My eyes watered until I could barely see, but I kept pushing forward, driven by a desperation I'd never felt before. "Where are you?" I screamed into the night, my voice raw and hoarse. "I'm here to help." The silence that answered me was absolute, more complete than death itself, as if the entire world had suddenly gone deaf. When I reached the spot where they'd been, where I'd seen them clear as day not 30 seconds before, there was nothing but empty asphalt glistening with rain. No woman, no man, no struggle, No sign that anyone had ever been there at all, just the smell of wet pavement and that lingering sweetness that made my stomach churn. I spun in circles, my gun still raised, searching desperately for any trace of what I'd witnessed, but the fog had closed in so thick I could barely see my own feet. "This isn't possible," I whispered to myself, my voice sounding small and lost in that suffocating blanket of mist. I saw them. I know I saw them, but doubt was already creeping in like poison, making me question my own eyes, my own sanity, everything I thought I knew about reality. That's when I looked down and saw it, a cell phone lying on the wet asphalt, its screen cracked in a spiderweb pattern that caught what little light filtered through the fog. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely pick it up, the plastic case slick with moisture, and something else that felt oily and wrong against my fingers. The screen was still lit, despite the damage, showing the ghost image of a photograph that made my blood run cold. A young woman with long dark hair, smiling at the camera with the kind of innocent joy that belongs to someone who still believes the world is a good place. I'd seen that face before, I was sure of it, but my mind was reeling too hard to place where or when. The phone felt heavier than it should have, like it was made of lead instead of plastic and circuits, and holding it made my skin crawl with a sensation I couldn't name. I stumbled back toward my truck, clutching that broken phone like it was evidence of my own sanity, the fog seeming to push against me with every step. My headlights looked like distant stars through the thick mist, and for a terrifying moment, I thought I might not find my way back, might wander forever in this white hell until I became just another ghost story truckers tell at rest stops. When I finally reached my cab, I practically threw myself inside, slamming the door and locking it as if that flimsy barrier could keep out whatever evil lurked in that fog. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition, and when the engine roared to life, the sound was like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. But even as I sat there in the relative safety of my cab, that broken phone on the seat beside me seemed to pulse with its own malevolent energy. I grabbed my CB radio and frantically tried to raise someone, anyone, who might be able to help make sense of what I'd just experienced. "Breaker 19, this is that Pete heading south on the Cafezal grade. I need police assistance immediately," I called out, my voice high and tight with panic, but the radio gave me nothing but that same dead silence that had haunted me all night. I tried different channels, adjusted my squelch, even checked my power levels, but it was like every other trucker in the world had simply vanished into thin air. Finally, my cell phone picked up enough signal to dial 911, and when the dispatcher answered, her voice sounded like salvation itself, cutting through my terror. "911, what's your emergency?" she asked, and I poured out my story in a breathless rush, telling her about the woman, the man, the impossible disappearance, everything. "Sir, can you repeat your location?" the dispatcher asked after I'd finished, her voice taking on that professional calm that emergency operators use when they think they're dealing with a drunk or a crazy person. I gave her the mile marker, described the curve where it happened, even offered to meet responding officers wherever they wanted. "We'll have a unit check the area," she said, though I could hear the skepticism in her voice. "But sir, I need to ask, have you been drinking tonight?" The question hit me like a slap in the face, and I found myself stuttering denials, insisting that I was stone cold sober, that what I'd seen was real. "Just please send someone," I begged, hating how desperate I sounded. "There's a woman out there who needs help." But even as I said it, doubt was eating at me like acid, making me wonder if I really had lost my mind on that godforsaken mountain. 20 minutes later, I saw the red and blue lights cutting through the fog like colored knives, and I'd never been so happy to see police in my entire life. The state trooper who approached my truck was a big man with kind eyes and the patient manner of someone who'd dealt with his share of highway crazies over the years. "You the one who called in the disturbance?" he asked, shining his flashlight into my cab, and I nodded eagerly, holding up the broken phone like it was proof of my story. But when I told him about the woman being dragged, about the man in dark clothes, about how they'd vanished into thin air, his expression slowly changed from concern to the kind of weary resignation cops get when they realize they're dealing with someone who's lost touch with reality. "Sir," he said gently, "we've searched this entire area twice. There's no sign of any struggle, no evidence that anyone was ever here except you and your truck." The trooper took the broken phone from my trembling hands, turning it over under his flashlight like he was examining evidence from a crime scene. "Where exactly did you find this?" he asked, his voice carrying that professional skepticism that cops develop after years of dealing with drunks, druggies, and people who've simply snapped under the pressure of life on the road. I pointed to the spot where they'd vanished, maybe 30 yards ahead of where we stood, and watched as he walked over to examine the asphalt with the methodical precision of a man who'd worked 1,000 accident scenes. When he came back, he was shaking his head slowly, that look of patient concern back in his eyes, like he was dealing with a confused child. "Sir, there's no sign of a struggle, no scuff marks, no blood, nothing to indicate anyone was ever dragged across that pavement," he said gently, but I could hear the unspoken words hanging in the air between us. "You need help, buddy." I snatched the phone back from him, desperate to prove I wasn't losing my mind, and pressed the cracked screen until the photo appeared again. "Look at this," I said, holding it up so his flashlight illuminated the image of that young woman with the dark hair and innocent smile. "I've seen this girl before. I know I have." The trooper squinted at the damaged screen, his expression shifting from skepticism to something that might have been recognition, though he tried to hide it behind his professional mask. "You've seen her where?" he asked, his tone more serious now, and I racked my brain trying to remember where I'd encountered that face before. Then it hit me like a freight train, the truck stop bulletin board, covered with flyers and missing person posters, and there she was among them, smiling out from a piece of paper that someone had stapled next to ads for used tires and CB radios. "The Flying J about 50 miles back," I exclaimed, my voice cracking with excitement and relief that I wasn't completely insane. "She's on one of those missing person flyers they put up on the bulletin board." The trooper's face went pale in the harsh glare of his flashlight, and for a moment he looked like he'd seen a ghost, as which, considering what I'd just been through, might not have been far from the truth. He reached for his radio, spoke quietly into it in that coded language cops use when they don't want civilians to understand what they're saying, then turned back to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Sir, I need you to follow me to the station," he said, his voice carrying a weight that hadn't been there before. "We need to talk about this phone and about what you think you saw tonight." Something in his tone made my stomach clench with dread, like I'd just opened a door that should have stayed locked forever. The ride to the state police barracks felt like a funeral procession, my truck following his cruiser through fog that seemed reluctant to let us pass. Every few minutes I'd glance at that broken phone sitting on my passenger seat, and I swear the cracked screen flickered with images that shouldn't have been there. Glimpses of dark hair, terrified eyes, hands reaching out for help that would never come. The sweet, rotting smell lingered in my cab, despite having all the windows cracked, clinging to my clothes and hair like smoke from a house fire. When we finally pulled into the parking lot of the police station, the fluorescent lights cutting through the darkness felt like salvation, though I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever answers waited inside weren't going to bring me any peace. The trooper waited for me by the entrance, his face grim in the harsh artificial light, and I knew that my night of hell was far from over. Inside the station, they sat me in a small interview room that smelled of stale coffee and broken dreams, the kind of place where people's lives get picked apart under harsh lights and recorded for posterity. Detective Sarah Mills was her name, a woman in her 40s with tired eyes and the kind of patience that comes from years of dealing with the worst humanity has to offer. She studied the broken phone with the intensity of a scientist, examining a new species, occasionally glancing up at me with an expression I couldn't decipher. "Tell me again about the woman you saw," she said, her voice gentle but insistent, and I went through the whole story once more, watching her face for any sign that she believed me. When I finished, she set the phone down carefully and looked at me with eyes that held secrets I wasn't sure I wanted to know. "The girl in this photo is Marina Santos," Detective Mills said quietly, her words falling into the room like stones into still water. "She disappeared 3 months ago while hitchhiking through the mountains." My heart started pounding as she continued. "We found her car abandoned at the bottom of Cafes Al Grade, and the official report lists her death as suicide. Jumped from the cliffs, body never recovered." But there was something in her voice, a hesitation that suggested the official story wasn't the whole truth, and when I pressed her on it, she looked away like she was wrestling with demons of her own. "Between you and me," she whispered, glancing toward the door like she was afraid someone might be listening, "I never believed she killed herself, but without a body, without evidence of foul play, the case was closed." The weight of her words settled over me like a burial shroud, and I realized I'd stumbled into something much darker than a simple missing person case. She pulled out a thick file folder and spread photographs across the table, images of Marina's abandoned car, the cliff where she supposedly jumped, and dozens of missing person flyers that had been posted throughout the region. Marina Santos, 22 years old, journalism student at the State University. Last seen alive at a truck stop on Highway 101, Detective Mills recited like she'd memorized every detail. She was investigating stories about women who'd gone missing along mountain highways, writing some kind of expose for her senior project. I stared at the photos, my hands shaking as I recognized the same innocent smile from the broken phone, and something cold settled in my stomach like a chunk of ice. "You think someone killed her?" I said, and it wasn't a question, it was a statement that hung in the air between us like an accusation. "I think Marina Santos got too close to something dangerous," she replied, "and someone made sure she couldn't finish her story." The detective leaned forward, her eyes intense in the fluorescent light, and asked the question that would haunt me for years to come. "You said the man dragging her had his back to you. Did you see anything distinctive about him? Anything at all that might help us identify him?" I closed my eyes trying to summon that terrifying image from my memory, but all I could see was a dark silhouette against the fog, faceless and anonymous like death itself. "He was tall, maybe 6 feet or more, wearing dark clothes, but I never saw his face," I admitted, hating how useless I sounded. It happened so fast, and then they just vanished. Detective Mills nodded grimly, like this wasn't the first time she'd heard a story that made no sense, and I got the distinct impression that Marina Santos wasn't the only woman who'd disappeared along these mountain roads. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said, using my last name for the first time, "I'm going to ask you to do something that might sound crazy, but I need you to take this phone back." "Take it back," I stammered, staring at that cracked screen like it was a poisonous snake ready to strike. "Why would I want to keep that thing?" Detective Mills gathered up the photographs and closed the file folder, her movements deliberate and careful, like she was handling evidence from an active crime scene. "Because somehow that phone found its way to you tonight, and I don't think it was an accident," she said, her voice carrying a weight that made my skin crawl. "Marina Santos was trying to tell the world about what happens to women on these roads, and maybe she's still trying." The implications of her words hit me like a physical blow, and I found myself backing away from the table as if distance could protect me from whatever supernatural horror I'd become entangled with. You think her ghost gave me this phone?" I whispered. And Detective Mills looked at me with eyes that had seen too much darkness to dismiss any possibility, no matter how impossible it seemed. She walked me out to my truck as dawn was breaking over the mountains, the fog finally beginning to lift like a curtain being drawn back to reveal the stage where last night's nightmare had played out. "If you see her again," Detective Mills said quietly, pressing a business card into my hand, "you call me immediately, day or night." I wanted to tell her that I never planned to drive this route again, that I'd rather lose my job than face whatever evil lurked in these hills, but something in her expression told me that Marina Santos wouldn't let me off that easy. As I climbed back into my cab, that broken phone sitting on the passenger seat like a malevolent passenger, I realized that my life had changed forever on this mountain road. The sun was rising, but I knew that for me, the darkness was just beginning, and somewhere in the back of my mind I could still hear that voice from my CB radio, weak and desperate, asking why I hadn't helped her when she needed me most. 6 months have passed since that night on Cafes Algrade, and I swear on everything holy that the nightmare hasn't ended. If anything, it's gotten worse. That broken phone sits on my dashboard like a cursed talisman, following me from truck to truck, no matter how many times I've tried to get rid of it. I've thrown it in dumpsters, left it in rest areas, even drove over it with my own wheels, but every morning when I climb into my cab, there it is, sitting exactly where I left it the first time. The cracked screen flickers to life at the strangest moments, usually when I'm alone on dark highways, showing me that same photograph of Marina Santos smiling innocently at the camera. But now her eyes seem different, sadder, like they're trying to tell me something I'm too stupid or too scared to understand. The other truckers at the stops have started whispering about me, calling me Ghost Phone Rodriguez behind my back, though some of them cross themselves when they say it. Word travels fast in our community, and everyone knows about the crazy driver who claims he saw a dead girl being murdered on the mountain. Most think I've lost my mind from too many years on the road, too much caffeine and not enough sleep finally catching up with my brain. But there are others, the old-timers, who've been running these routes since before GPS and cell towers, who pull me aside and tell me stories that make my blood run cold. "You ain't the first one to see her," old Pete Morrison told me just last week, his weathered hands shaking as he lit another cigarette. "And you sure as hell won't be the last." Detective Mills calls me every few weeks, always asking the same questions. Have I seen Marina again? Has the phone shown me anything new? Am I still driving the mountain routes? I've started lying to her, telling her everything's normal, because the truth is too crazy even for a cop who believes in ghosts. The truth is that Marina appears to me almost every night now, not just on Cafes Al Grade, but on highways across 3 states. Sometimes she's being dragged like that first night. Sometimes she's standing on the shoulder pointing at my truck. And once, God help me, I saw her sitting in my passenger seat when I glanced over during a lightning flash. She never speaks, never makes a sound, but those eyes are screaming for justice that seems impossible to deliver. The phone started ringing last month, even though it has no service, no battery life, and the screen is too damaged to show any carrier signal. The first time it happened, I nearly drove off the road, the shrill electronic tone cutting through my cab like fingernails on a chalkboard. When I answered, and I don't know why I answered, maybe curiosity, maybe stupidity, there was nothing but static and what sounded like wind howling through empty spaces. But sometimes, if I listen really carefully, I can hear a voice underneath the noise. Help me, find him, make them pay. The words are barely whispers, fractured and distant, but I know it's Marina trying to communicate from whatever hell she's trapped in. Sleep has become my enemy because that's when the dreams come. Vivid, horrible nightmares where I'm not just watching Marina being murdered, but living it through her eyes. I feel the rough hands grabbing me, smell the killer's breath, experience the terror of knowing I'm about to die and there's nothing I can do to stop it. In these dreams, I see his face clearly, a middle-aged man with cold eyes and a smile that belongs in a morgue, someone who's done this before and will do it again. When I wake up screaming, drenched in sweat that smells like that sweet, rotting perfume from the mountain, I know Marina is showing me her memories, trying to give me the clues I need to identify her killer. But how do you tell a detective that a dead girl is sending you psychic messages through your nightmares? I've started carrying a small digital camera, hoping to catch evidence of Marina's appearances, some proof that I'm not completely insane, but every photograph comes out blurred or distorted, like the camera can't quite focus on whatever supernatural frequency she exists on. The few images that do show something recognizable are worse than the blank ones. Dark shapes that might be human, shadows that move in impossible directions, and once a clear shot of empty highway that somehow shows Marina's reflection in my side mirror, even though she wasn't visible to my naked eye. I've shown these photos to other drivers, to mechanics, even to a priest at a truck stop chapel, and they all see different things, or claim they see nothing at all, which scares me even more. The harassment isn't limited to visual appearances anymore. Marina has found ways to manipulate my truck that should be impossible for someone who doesn't exist. My CB radio turns itself on and scans through channels until it finds static, then amplifies that white noise until it fills my cab like the sound of screaming souls. My GPS reroutes itself to show roads that aren't on any map, leading to coordinates that point to empty fields where I suspect other bodies might be buried. Even my engine responds to her presence, running rough when she's near, as if her spiritual energy interferes with the mechanical systems that keep me moving down these haunted highways. I've had 3 different mechanics check my truck from bumper to bumper, and they all say everything's in perfect working order. Last Tuesday night, driving through Kentucky on I-75, Marina appeared in my headlights more solid and real than ever before, standing in the middle of the interstate like she was daring me to run her down. I slammed on my brakes so hard that my load shifted and my trailer started jackknifing, nearly causing a multi-car pileup behind me. When I finally got the rig under control and looked again, she was gone, but there was something new on my windshield. Words written in what looked like condensation, but the night was dry and clear. "Truck stop killer," it said in shaky letters that faded. Even as I read them, "He's still out there." That's when I realized Marina wasn't just trying to get justice for herself. She was warning me about other women who were going to die if I didn't find a way to stop him. I pulled into the next rest area and sat in my cab for 3 hours, staring at that broken phone and trying to work up the courage to call Detective Mills. When I finally dialed her number, it was almost dawn, and I could hear the exhaustion in her voice when she answered. "Detective, it's Rodriguez," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need to tell you something, and you're not going to believe it." There was a long pause before she replied, and when she did, her tone was different, more urgent. "Actually, Mr. Rodriguez, I think you need to come in immediately. We've had 3 more women disappear along mountain highways in the last 2 months, and all of them were last seen at truck stops." The confirmation that Marina's warnings were real hit me like a physical blow, and I knew that whatever was happening to me was bigger than one ghost seeking vengeance. Detective Mills was waiting for me when I arrived at the station, her desk covered with files, photographs, and maps that looked like the command center for hunting a serial killer. "Sit down, Mr. Rodriguez," she said, gesturing to the same chair where I'd learned Marina's identity 6 months ago. "We need to talk about what you've been experiencing, and I need you to tell me everything, no matter how crazy it sounds." The fluorescent lights seemed harsher than before, casting shadows that reminded me of the fog on Cafezal Grade, and I noticed that Detective Mills looked older, worn down by months of chasing a killer who left no evidence except missing women and grieving families. When I started telling her about the phone calls, the dreams, the messages written on my windshield, she didn't look at me like I was insane. She looked at me like I was the key to solving the biggest case of her career. 3 more women, all young, all disappeared from truck stops within a 100-mile radius of where you saw Marina, Detective Mills said, spreading photographs across the desk like she was dealing cards in a game where death was the only winner. Jessica Chen, 19, vanished from a Flying J in West Virginia. Sarah Mitchell, 23, last seen at a pilot in Tennessee. And Maria Gonzalez, 21, disappeared from a TA in North Carolina. Each photo showed a young woman with that same innocent smile Marina had worn, and I felt sick knowing that they were probably all dead, their bodies scattered across mountain roads where no one would ever find them. "The pattern is always the same," she continued. "They're seen talking to someone in the parking lot, usually described as a middle-aged white male driving a dark-colored vehicle, and then they vanish without a trace." The description matched the shadowy figure from my dreams, and I knew Marina had been showing me the face of their killer. I pulled out my phone and showed Detective Mills the blurry photographs I'd taken, watching her face as she studied each image with the intensity of someone looking for clues in a crime scene. "These distortions, these shadow figures," she said, pointing to the dark shapes that appeared in my photos, "they're consistent with electromagnetic interference, the kind that might be caused by, well, by something science can't explain yet." She looked up at me with eyes that held a mixture of desperation and hope, and I realized she was willing to believe in ghosts if it meant catching a killer. "I've been working with a forensic psychologist who specializes in cases involving alleged supernatural phenomena," she continued, "and she thinks Marina might be trying to communicate specific information about her murder, details that only the victim would know. The possibility that my nightmare encounters might actually help solve these murders gave me a strange sense of purpose, even as it terrified me." That broken phone chose that moment to ring, its damaged speaker crackling with static, and that familiar howling wind sound that always preceded Marina's attempts at communication. Detective Mills stared at the device like it was about to explode, her hand instinctively moving toward her service weapon, while I answered with trembling fingers. "Marina," I whispered into the cracked microphone, and the static seemed to organize itself into something that might have been words. "License. Plate 7-4, black truck." The message faded into electronic noise, but not before I heard something that made my blood freeze. The sound of a man's laughter, cold and cruel, and very much alive. Detective Mills was frantically writing down everything I repeated, her pen moving across paper like she was taking dictation from the dead, which I suppose she was. "We need to set up surveillance at every truck stop within 200 miles, Detective Mills said, her voice taking on the sharp edge of someone who'd just seen a break in an impossible case. "And I want you to keep driving your regular routes, but with police backup positioned where we can respond quickly." The idea of using myself as bait for a serial killer should have terrified me, but after months of being haunted by Marina's ghost, I felt like I owed her whatever justice I could help deliver. "What if he realizes it's a trap?" I asked, and Detective Mills smiled grimly. "Then we'll catch him trying to run, which is more than we've had to work with so far." She handed me a small GPS tracking device and a panic button disguised as a CB radio microphone. "If Marina appears to you again, if she shows you anything that might lead us to him, you press this button and we'll have backup to your location in minutes." The next 3 weeks passed in a haze of sleepless nights and paranoid days, driving familiar routes while constantly watching for any sign of Marina or her killer. The broken phone rang almost every night now, Marina's voice becoming clearer and more urgent with each call. "Red Rose truck stop, Wednesday night. He'll be there. Dark blue Peterbilt, Montana plates." Her messages were becoming more specific, more detailed, like she was gaining strength from my willingness to listen and help. Detective Mills had teams positioned at truck stops across 5 states, all waiting for the mysterious dark-colored vehicle and its murderous driver to make an appearance. I felt like I was living in 2 worlds, the normal daylight world of deliveries and dispatch calls, and the supernatural nightmare realm, where dead girls whispered secrets through broken electronics. It was a rainy Thursday night when everything came together, the pieces of Marina's ghostly puzzle finally forming a picture that would lead us to her killer. I was parked at the Red Rose truck stop in Virginia, exactly where Marina had told me to be, when I saw him. A middle-aged man with cold eyes and that same cruel smile from my dreams, walking through the parking lot like a predator hunting for prey. He was driving a dark blue Peterbilt with Montana plates, just as Marina had described, and when he approached a young woman pumping gas into her car, every instinct I'd developed told me this was the moment we'd been waiting for. My hand found the panic button Detective Mills had given me, and I pressed it 3 times, the signal that meant "Suspect identified, move in now," while keeping my eyes locked on the man who had murdered Marina Santos and God knows how many other innocent women. The arrest happened so fast it was almost anticlimactic. After months of supernatural build-up, police cars converged on the truck stop from every direction, their lights cutting through the rain like avenging angels. The killer, his name was Robert Dale Carson, 43 years old with a history of violence against women stretching back 20 years, tried to run when he saw the police, but there was nowhere to go in a parking lot surrounded by law enforcement. They found evidence in his truck that linked him to at least 7 murders across 4 states, including items that had belonged to Marina Santos and the 3 other women who disappeared in recent months. As they led him away in handcuffs, he looked directly at me through my windshield, and for just a moment I thought I saw something else looking back. Marina's eyes, filled with satisfaction that justice was finally being served. That night, for the first time in 6 months, the broken phone didn't ring, and my dreams were peaceful and free of supernatural visitations. When I woke up the next morning, the phone was gone from my dashboard, not hidden, not thrown away, just gone as mysteriously as it had appeared that first night on Cafes Algrade. Detective Mills called me that afternoon to tell me that Carson had confessed to Marina's murder and 4 others, giving them enough information to locate burial sites and provide closure to families who'd been wondering what happened to their daughters. "She's at peace now," Detective Mills said, though I could hear the exhaustion in her voice. "Marina Santos can finally rest." But as I hung up and started my truck for another run down the highway, I wondered if Marina was really gone, or if she was just waiting somewhere in the darkness for the next trucker who might need her help to catch another killer. The ghost of Marina Santos taught me that some roads lead to more than just destinations. Sometimes they lead to justice, redemption, and the terrible responsibility of speaking for the dead who can no longer speak for themselves. Every time I drive through mountains at night now, every time I see a young woman alone at a truck stop, I remember that there are predators out there who count on our silence, our disbelief, our willingness to look the other way when something doesn't seem quite right. Marina couldn't save herself, but through me, through that broken phone and months of supernatural torment, she saved other women from suffering her fate. And sometimes late at night when the CB is quiet and the highway stretches endlessly ahead, I still hear her voice in the static, not asking for help anymore, but saying thank you, and reminding me that the dead never truly rest until the living choose to listen to their stories and act on their warnings.